that. So, for everyone who's joining or interested from a recording perspective, today's session's on one of the more challenging parts of Microsoft Viva, which is how do you actually get started? How do you roll it out within an organization? There's a lot of variance in that, but I thought it would be a good topic to try and address directly, because a lot of people, they understand the value of Viva, they've heard about Viva, they may even have used some of the Viva workloads, but not all of them. And so this could be a great opportunity to talk about what other customers have kind of learned directly, what's worked and what hasn't around Viva deployments, especially like scaling beyond the pilot and how to kind of do the pilot in the right way so you're set up for that success. I'm hoping to share a lot of that. And yeah, it'd be a really exciting session. In addition to the slides for today, which are of course online, and then the recording that'll be on YouTube, if anyone has any questions on the sidebar, just ask them in the Q&A panel. I will absolutely be looking like this back and forth throughout the session in case something pops up, and then that way I can make sure I kind of address it in the flow of the session or as a follow-up right after.
No
With
worries
that,
about the Q&A. I will be here. I will see if any questions will pop up. I will just dive in
amazing,
between. Yeah, I
amazing.
will just ping you. I'll say, hey, you have one question.
So
So
what I'll share with everyone is this is a community event. I love community events. They're my favorite things, whether we do them in person or we do them virtually. And in the community, connecting with one another is what we're trying to do, right? We want to make sure that we have people we can debate with, we can ask questions, we can, reach out to if we have challenges that arise. So if you haven't had a chance to connect with somebody else in the peers, like across these different sessions, please do so. And then if you don't have another connection, then I'll be your best friend moving forward from here. So I really mean this. I'm super friendly. I have people who are always very hesitant to reach out to me. I always love discussion because I almost always learn something from every interaction. You'd be surprised at how many little tactics and successes people have had. Maybe not with the particular technology we're talking about, with other things that actually adds value in my future discussions with other customers. And I also really enjoy it because it's a great break for my day when I'm doing most of my days are spent doing roadmaps and technology planning with large customers and things like that. So it's wonderful when I get a moment to take a step back and just like do some Q&A or say like, hey, here's where you're at in your journey. If I was you, here's what I would do. It tends to be quite more prescriptive experience than what we're going to do today. And I think that's apt since with pilots, where you are in your journey is going to greatly change the approach that you might use. So what are we hearing around employee experience more broadly? The first and hopefully obvious thing, again, all slides are available for you guys later, is that employee experience is beneficial. Pretty much everyone universally understands the value of it, especially at a strategic and leadership level in the organizations today. Most employees understand the value of investing in employee experience, and most organizations actually see a lot of value in a unified employee experience, which is essentially what the sort of employee experience platform play that Microsoft is doing today. And so when we think about that, particularly the Microsoft platform play for employee experience, this is similar to discussions we've had in the past where we've had to deploy other technologies. Maybe I've, working towards moving to the cloud and modernizing. Maybe you're still in that process of modernizing today. And as you look to modernize, you often want to roll out specific technologies and, a smart way that doesn't create issues down the road. And so, of course, that's true with the core technologies of Microsoft 365, but it's also very true with these employee experience technologies, especially because we're affecting potentially major changes in the way people work. A lot of what you see in the employee experience platform is really about what the future state of employee experience should be empowered beyond on, how it should be embraced and how it should be leveraged versus more of a traditional experience that maybe many of us, especially as technologists, might be used to. So again, there's big changes happening. And the question for most people is, how do I get started? So I hope that today I'll be able to give you guys some specific advice and guidance, tactics, things like that. If you have extra questions, again, feel free to reach out where I can be more prescriptive on a one-on-one. Plus, I can share stuff that I can't NDA-wise in a discussion like this. So the proven approach then today is to start with simple things like workshops. And there's actually this wonderful set of toolkits and resources Microsoft has built that I really like all of them. Now, of course, we don't execute exactly what they have in these PowerPoints and things like that. You have to tailor it based on the needs and the scenario the customer's in. But generally speaking, there's these wonderful resources that Microsoft has created for partners and for customers where they can run these workshops. And the workshops are around educating, so uplifting and educating customer understanding around particularly, some of the Viva workloads. And when we think of those Viva workloads, what I'm basically suggesting is before you go to pilot, you should have already invested in things like this. There should be key stakeholders in the business who understand the use cases, the scenarios, and that those have been mapped for those users. Now, a lot of other slides are available online. When I uploaded this, I unhid a bunch. But for simplicity, what I mean by this is when you take something as simple as Viva Connections, you really want to break down what are the things we're trying to do with it and how are we going to measure and provide more value with something like Viva Connections. And when you map out those scenarios, you can kind of determine, what parts of this, what ROI and benefits you think are most strategic and most relevant. And that might even guide you in terms of how to build that out. So with that kind of preamble, sort of academic, very important, do the pre-work of workshopping and education before you go and plan your pilot. Let's assume you've done that. Let's assume you've done a Viva Insights set of workshops. Let's assume you've done Viva Goals, Viva Connections, Viva Topics, all these educational workshops to really align the value propositions and how they can help with, business needs, real tangible business needs. Now, if you've done that work, you're in a really good place already, where now it becomes more of a tactical discussion around how do we frame these. So one of the ways that we've seen successfully people frame the idea of Viva Connections is this idea of, hey, you already have an intranet. We already know of intranets. Let's bring that to where you work, which is in this case, Teams. Microsoft Teams, both in the desktop as well as Teams in the mobile experience. And so the idea there is a relatively easy thing to understand. We're going to educate and plan for Viva Connections. We're going to implement it. We're going to pin the app and help users get access to it. And then we're going to plan for further enrichment of this over time, where we're going to continue to push for bringing that intranet, its content, its services, its apps to you where you work. And you'll see here that I have a suggestion of 3 days. And the reason I specifically have 3 days here is because Connections is one of the easiest workloads in most organizations to just get up and running. You could do it in less than 3 days. You could do it over a couple weeks. You could do it over a couple months, depending on your size. But fundamentally, the approach here is the same 3 steps: educate and plan, implement and pin, empower and improve the experience over time. Iteration is important for an experience like Viva Connections, which I'll readdress in a second. Now, I'm not going to talk through a heavy text slide like this, but I do want to highlight each time I talk about a pilot, I've got, basically all the things I'm going to talk about in some written form. So again, in the slides, as well as the notes of the slides, there's a ton of material there for you for reference in what's been uploaded. Now, in particular, for something like Viva Connections, when we think about that flow, the question then becomes, if it's so easy, why aren't organizations doing this? Why isn't every organization on the world right now using Viva Connections? And that's where you start to run into some of the challenges around a pilot around Viva Connections. So let's talk about some of those particular challenges and why specifically there's some stuff to learn here. The biggest challenge with Viva Connections is that it can be used to address gaps within, our intranet experience, but often you have gaps that technically or non-technically that might block you from using Viva Connections right away. The second challenge is that it's new. It's a new experience. For many organizations, probably on this call, you might already believe that Teams is your digital hub of your digital organization, your digital workplace today. But some organizations are really struggling with that, where the intranet has always been the digital hub of the organization. The emphasis has always been, what can we do to bring more people to the intranet? That has to change. And that's a hard thing for corporate comms groups and other people to really understand, reconcile. And that's part of this discussion around Viva Connections. Because Viva Connections itself may be easy to implement, but the change it represents is much bigger. As an example, in the past, we had a major change where enterprise social entered our industry. And when I was at Enterprise 2.0 on a panel, and we were talking about this, and Yammer was finally publicly announced, I was very excited. It basically won me the argument on the panel. Like, yeah, Yammer has been, Microsoft's serious about social. Enterprises are serious about social. But at the end of the day, what that did is it transformed the way intranets work, because intranets became more about liking and commenting, two-way dialogue. They became more about personalization and engagement. They became became more about mobile experiences, especially became on the rise after that as well. And so that would arguably be a pivotal moment where there was a substantial change in the way intranets and as well as corporate communication works. I would argue, and I think most people do today, that we're in another major transformative event where for corporate comms for the last 10 years, it hasn't really changed. Now it's changing where the intention is to be more dynamic, more AI enriched, and most importantly, for the internet and all its resources and its power and apps and services to come to you where you are in the context of your work. And so that is a big change from the way we've worked in the past. So a really simple analogy of this is we're used to things like static news. I create news, I bring people to the internet, they see and consume that news. Here you see this concept of boosting, which is unlike the traditional model of news where I would say, okay, show this item, right? This is literally a hero web part, so I just edit it on a manual basis, or the traditional news web part that SharePoint has, show this item first, right? And so what that can lead is this stuff might change, but as they go to this page, it feels static. It feels like it's not changing enough. And here you don't have that same problem. You have a better solution with something like the Microsoft Viva Connections feed, particularly because it has capabilities like these that are coming this year around things like boost this until the news post is viewed. So instead of just leaving it there until a specific time, boost it, and then if someone clicks on it and they viewed it, then let's get rid of it. Or if we've shown it to them a million times and they've not engaged on it, they're not interested in it, stop showing it to them. And so this is a much more intelligent way of a very simple thing we've been doing for years, which is communicating news, but it has potentially significant ramifications in understanding how we govern, how we manage, and how we coordinate news. And this is really at the core challenge of something like Viva Connections is yes, it's easy to turn on the app and enable our modern internet experience in SharePoint to surface within Teams. The struggle often is the underpinnings, the changes that this brings along with it and understanding those. The other challenge is Viva Connections is part of the Teams experience for good reason. So here, as an example, if I'm in the mobile app and I'm looking at the dashboard as a frontline worker, let's say in a bank, and then I look at the feed, I can also jump quickly and easily into chat messages. In fact, the notification flow, the activity feed, all of those things within a Teams engine experience are enhanced in a number of different ways by the Viva workloads, especially things like Viva Connections. So what does this mean? It means that there's value here. This isn't the same thing as saying, oh, we're going to replace our intranet app, right? It's saying, no, we don't need an intranet app. Everything we should need, really arguably, should be represented in a core cohesive experience that's integrated with Teams. This means that people don't have to deploy multiple apps. They only need to use a number of apps on their phone like Teams, and then Teams just naturally flows with, intranet. Again, bringing the internet to where people are, which is this place where we do content work like Teams. Again, my stuff is something like Outlook, my schedule, my calendar, my emails. Our content generally today is in Teams and becoming more universally represented, linked to, integrated within Teams. 1,600 plus applications, right, within the Teams ecosystem. There's a good reason for that. Viva Connections dashboards also can be added later. So Viva Connections isn't just the Teams app and Teams integration experience. It's also this wonderful thing called the dashboard. That can be done later. In fact, in almost every organization, when we get started, real world here, in most organizations, we don't do dynamic dashboard cards to kick it off. We do static ones. So you can still have beautiful cards like the history of the organization or, frequently asked questions or things like that, where you statically manage those, right? In the same way you'd manage like a page traditionally, right? So you can do that, use dashboard cards for their power, but add dynamism at a later point. That's important. You can totally roll out dashboard cards, or you can just remove it. You don't have to roll out. It's not like you have to use dashboard cards. You can still benefit from Viva Connections, Teams integration, and things like that without the use of cards. And I think a lot of more customers need to understand this because what it means is it removes one more thing that could delay the rollout of Viva Connections. It's much better to roll out Viva Connections and then add dashboard and then add static cards and then add longer term dynamic and integrated cards. And this is important because the real long-term value of the dashboard, this particular capability in Viva Connections, is the ecosystem. 1,600 plus applications integrated and vendors integrated with Microsoft Teams, right? almost every one of those vendors will light up over time in the Viva Connections dashboard experience. And so as they light up and it becomes easier and easier to consume them, that means that it becomes easier and easier and super cost effective to integrate your intranet with hundreds of different systems that employees use on a daily basis. So this is the real value of Viva Connections. Yes, it brings it into Teams, but it's things like this where the Teams, as a digital hub of the digital workplace, we can benefit from that in a more traditional intranet experience like a dashboard. And so these experiences, again, just to kind of show for mobile, since the thing I was showing earlier was desktop based, mobile experiences are the same way. There's a ton of value in having these third-party integrations and having them available in the dashboard, but that doesn't need to be in the pilot. That doesn't need to be in your initial rollout. That can come later. Viva Connections newsfeed can be added later as well. I mentioned boosting. If you're not ready to tackle that, that's okay, right? Educate and inform, but we can do that after we roll out Viva Connections. The newsfeed control we don't have to use. Here's an example that's kind of common. I couldn't show customers one, so I'm using one of our environments. So you can see we have us content on the left, and then we have me content or you content on the right. That's a common pattern we see on a lot of organizational homepages nowadays. And so using the feed, the Viva Connections feed for me content makes sense since it's basically recommended news and Yammer content, storyline content, etc. for you, right? So it integrates multiple signals and brings it, but it's not really as configurable as the traditional news is, right? Traditional news, we have that I want to say archaic, an old school model of like, I'm going to make sure this goes first, this goes second, it's in this sort order, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more control you have in the traditional model. And there's a little bit less control. It's boosting and different. It's different, right, in this new model. But for some organizations, that might mean that this isn't really ready for their usage yet. The second thing you'll see is this concept of you or us versus or we content versus your content is something you can continue not just with that, but with things like the wonderful Microsoft 365 feed web part, a great web part, the your frequent sites versus all the key sites in our organization that are maybe targeted to that employee, things like the most viewed documents across the organization or trending documents that I have access to versus my documents that are most popular in the organization. I still think it's funny that this one that's about, an offsite, breakfast thing is my most popular document. But you guys get the value, right? You can do things like that that improve both your intranet, but also mean that Viva Connections is no longer as daunting because it means we can roll out strategically the connections experience around news when we're ready. Viva Connections also has this other technical problem sometimes of, hey, well, we actually are an organization with multiple businesses within one tenant, and that's not an uncommon challenge. And so if we use Viva Connections, it's only one home site, right? So that shows up, and that's the integration point. We'll have to wait until end of April for multiple home sites, right, when they're public in 2023. The truth is, no. Please, for the love of God, do not delay until then. Start using it now because it delivers value. You can pilot and choose which groups get it. So you could just have a departmental solution, or you could just modernize the homepage, but not everything else. This modernization is important too, because a lot of customers also have SharePoint Classic, right? They have this wonderful legacy that they have to deal with. Wonderful being, maybe not the right term, but this challenging legacy they have to deal with, where they have to modernize. And because they're, that takes maybe months or years for some customers, it's important to understand that you don't have to have all of that modernized to work with Viva Connections, just a homepage. So, Microsoft themselves have recognized that this can be a challenge, not just for large customers who need something, right, to get started with Viva Connections, but a lot of smaller customers who don't have an intranet at all. Like there's a lot of customers we talk to who don't have an intranet. And so when you don't have an intranet, the nice thing is Microsoft's built an out of the box one for you, right? A really simple kind of getting started experience, which is the new Viva Connections home. And you can roll that out, or you can have it direct to your SharePoint environment, or you can have both. Here you have this, and then if you click on the landing, that would go to a more traditional intranet. So you have 3 different ways that you can roll this out. And if we take a step back, what I'm really saying is start Viva Connections now. Like yesterday, in every organization it should be deployed. There's literally no reasons. We have hundreds of organizations in public sector and security, like Department of Defense style organizations for multiple countries. We have organizations that do finance, insurance, all of them, very, very large companies, all of them have rolled out Viva Connections. And the reason for it is because they can pilot it they can target who. It's a Teams app, right? So you can say these users get it. And then what we can do is maybe pick a departmental portal and make that the home, right? Just for now, we'll make that the SharePoint home, and that'll show up until April, end of April, when multiple home sites are available. I get that this is critical for dashboard as an example to be successful, because you have to have multiple dashboards because we have different cards and you run into limitation challenges. But again, it shouldn't really block you. Now, this is only for larger customers, but I wanted to highlight it. Now, that's Viva Connections piloting in a nutshell, as well as some key patterns and practices. Let's talk about topics. Now, topics, you'll notice that I actually don't talk about topics in this particular pilot framing. Instead, I'm saying bring the intranet to where employees work. Now, topics, if you don't know this, is a knowledge management tool. It's amazing because it brings knowledge to you in the context of your work. Again, I often don't lead with the word knowledge because most employees don't really know, they don't have a pattern of what knowledge means to them, but almost every employee knows what an intranet is. So bringing the intranet to you and all the wonderful things the intranet can provide is an easier way to start grasping the idea behind Viva Topics. Now, does it do a lot more than that? Absolutely. But starting from a simple place is often a better way to start these types of pilots. The second thing you'll notice is that the pilot has a week's duration. This is important because topics requires us to actually curate and publish and manage topics. And if we're not doing that, then your pilot's going to be very unsuccessful, right? So we need to make sure that we have time to actually understand, learn, and start to use topics in order to really start to see the impact. So I would say 3 weeks is probably the minimum. 3 weeks plus is typically the pilot time frame. Now, again, from a flow perspective, you see a similar pattern: educate and plan, enable and explore, and enhance over time. Now, this is an interesting one because you see this word curator. So I'm going to come back to that. But again, I'll skip over this because there's a lot of text on the slide. But generally speaking, when we think of curators, what we're really saying is the people that are going to use topics first and are going to get the most value because they understand the value of topics are those that already curate pages. If I'm a person who leads lean manufacturing for the organization and I manage this lean manufacturing set of pages, a site, et cetera, for it, I'm going to get value from looking up the topic of lean manufacturing and seeing who are the people that it recommends, right? And why is it recommending them? Oh, they create a lot of material that calls lean manufacturing. I don't know this person. Let me reach out to them. Let me know more about this person in case maybe I should be working with them, or maybe they should even be a part of my site. Maybe I should add them in the contacts or experts within my group. Or maybe there's some documents and resources that I didn't know about that are really popular, right? That have lean manufacturing all throughout them. I have access to them. I just didn't know that they existed, or I wasn't aware that where they existed, et cetera. Now I have an opportunity to potentially bring those into my environment, to copy them, to link them, et cetera. I can improve my curated content through dynamic, intelligent recommendations from, in this case, Microsoft 365 through Viva Topics. So the curators are in the best position to understand the value of topics, and they're in the best position to action the value of Viva Topics so that everyone else can benefit from it, if not everyone else has a license in Viva Topics, which is the reality. In pilots, we're not going to license everyone if we don't know if Viva Topics has value. So let's license a small subset of people. The people who are most going to benefit from a small subset of licensing are curators or owners, content leaders, whatever you want to call them in the organization. So the challenge rarely with topics is that people see the value. The problem is if you want to start with everyone, you're in a really hard uphill battle because governance and scaling and permissions, DLP, all these things become way more complicated. Most of the people that are in content leadership roles have a level of access and authority, and it makes it a lot easier to govern, manage, and learn from those people than it will be across a larger group of distributed employees in an organization. So I'm not saying that you can't be successful rolling out topics for new employees or rolling out topics for all employees with a randomized control trial of pilot. That can work, but I am saying statistically we've found more and more success with starting with the curators, content leaders, and then scaling from there. And the reason for that is because they see value in the insights from topics. They don't need to use topics where it brings information to them everywhere they are. And that's an important distinction because, as I'll come back to it, it's something that can really reduce the challenges around piloting and set you up in a much better way for future success. So Viva Topics itself is quite easy to implement. The technical effort's quite low. Most organizations don't have a knowledge team, so they don't have like someone to lead this. They don't have governance readiness. And because of those two problems, the intranet team also makes sense because the intranet team already exists, right? They often already have content owners and champions and authors and whatever stewards across the organization. They know who all these people are. So not only do they know who they are, but they have motions with those people. They have training, they have connections with them. And so using the intranet team or corporate comms team or whatever you want to call it as a starting point and then building from there with topics makes total sense. The other big reason for this is because when you think about governing topics, you actually have to think about how many there are in the organization. In most organizations, there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of topics that we see. And so it can be daunting. Well, people that work in intranet spaces, they're used to curating, they're used to cleaning through content, finding the best stuff and sharing it. And so this means that they don't need to use topics for the traditional usage of it shows up in Teams, it shows up in email, it shows up, wherever I see that topic or term. They can use it essentially for a value proposition that's a little bit different, where it's basically like a content analytics and insight engine that helps them find content they didn't know about, helps them kind of refine and filter the best content, helps them find people, sites, Q&A, and other things they don't know about, so they can curate and uplift that into traditional, understood knowledge patterns like an intranet. And that's what I like to start with. There's a really good reason for this, right? Because if we start with those that are curated and champions, and there's so many initially, you'll actually find that over time, these topics start to actually be distributed in a different way in the organization. So again, this is that consumption experience, right? The long tail, the long-term benefit of topics is absolutely this, right? Wherever I am, no matter what I'm doing, I see a term or a topic and I can learn more about it in that just-in-time, just-in-time access, just-in-time information, etc. This is truly delivering, bringing the internet and all its resources and all your knowledge to you where you are in the context of your work, all with AI enrichment, recommendation engines, and much more. That's something that is delivered in the long tail, but the short tail is let's just get people using this, getting immediate value from it. It's really like the cost for topics is really low compared to how much value they'll get in the short term, right? And that also often means that those domain experts and subject matter experts, they'll stay licensed for much longer. So sometimes what happens is you do these wonderful topic pilots. There's actually a lot of success using it for content analytics, kind of improving traditional curated content, but then you have a gap, right, of maybe a month or two while you work on the broader, rollout strategy where you want to roll out from that initial group. And the difference here is now that group's seeded. So most of those people that the internet team works with are across the organization, right? They're already champions. And here's the really cool part. What they'll do without you telling them to do anything, and we've tested this, they'll start to confirm topics and publish them. There's statuses of topics, right? There's a way to like kind of life cycle them. They'll do that just to make sense of it because they don't want to have to keep looking for that topic again and trying to find it. So what they'll do is they'll actually start to confirm and publish topics. They'll actually publish them just so that they can kind of reference them and use them more frequently. And what that does is it means they understand fully the value of topics, and they've actually started to seed topics content for you as subject matter experts, not from an IT or intranet comms leadership perspective, but throughout the organization content leadership perspective, they started to seed topics. And I can tell you with 100% assurance, always within these pilot groups, some people are like, there's a lot of topics that I don't have pages for. I'd love to have those. Why aren't we just using topics? Like, why can't I just use that instead of doing this work of curating and copying and linking and doing everything else? Like, it does it for me. Why don't I do that? In fact, they'll often start to use and experiment with topics where they'll say, I think I can replace these pages I'm managing now with topics where I add these web parts, because topic pages can have web parts added to them, etc. I can add these things, and then that will actually make it better. So what you actually find is the grassroots momentum for the long tail of topics, right? This value proposition we really want actually happens kind of quite naturally by approaching it this way. The last comment on topics is more content in Microsoft 365, the better. It's important to note that content connected through search also works in this classification criteria. So if I have something like ServiceNow and I'm taking KB articles and I'm pulling that in through Microsoft Search, which is really easy to do. There's a first-party connection that Microsoft's built for that. Then essentially we can now surface that information in topics, and we can help people find it, discover it, etc. So this knowledge strategy thing isn't really just Microsoft content. It's every piece of content, but it needs to connect to Microsoft either through search or it needs to migrate in. And so for that, what we found is the challenge there is for a lot of customers, they haven't migrated, right? They still have file shares, they still have legacy SharePoint environments, they have other things. We need to help them transition a little bit more rapidly. And so for that, my advice to you, and it's really easy, is treat your migration projects as two projects, a migration one and an optimization one, because it's always better universally to migrate first, garbage in, take it all, put it in Microsoft 365, and then optimize, because you have better tooling in Microsoft 365 to optimize content than almost any other system and solution in the marketplace. Let me use a perfect example. File shares are terrible for optimization because you can't tell when something was last viewed. So no one's going to delete something or feel comfortable leaving it behind because they don't know if someone's viewed it before. If you bring that into the cloud, you bring it into SharePoint, OneDrive, wherever, if we bring it in there, now at least we can see when it was last viewed, when it was last downloaded, etc. That simple difference makes a world of difference when it comes to actually being able to clean up that content over time. So there's thousands of scenarios like this. I'm not talking about just 100 or 10. There's so many scenarios where optimization is easier in the cloud than it is on file shares or other systems. So make sure you do that. Plus, it also sets you up for success because optimization is really a service. It's an ongoing activity versus a project. All right, so that's Viva Topics. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is too slow. Let's speed it up. I'm with you. It's okay. The slide decks are available, so will the recording be. So Viva Learning is actually a pretty straightforward one also to pilot. It's really easy to understand. Essentially, we have this learning experience, a unified, connected learning experience that we want to bring people, because most of us are learning from multiple places. Yes, we have the traditional LMS, but we also learn from like a center of excellence IT site. We learn from this digital center of excellence site. We learn from this place. We've learned from that thing. So because we learn in all these different ways, if we can create a more unified, consistent learning experience, that's going to benefit everyone in the organization. But I actually like to pivot it a little bit differently. What we found with our organizations that we work with is that focusing on engagement with learning is actually a really big win for Viva Learning. If you don't know this, many people who have traditional LMSs, a lot of learning is mandated, right? It's compliance learning, whatever, you have to go do it. And what we find is that the number of people who participate in optional learning that's not mandated is very much on the rise when you introduce something like Viva Learning. Maybe it's the accessibility. I mean, and it's not maybe. It's the accessibility of the information. It's the ease of which you can, book time for yourself to learn that material. There's a lot of tools built into Viva Learning that are quite helpful, but especially the socialization where I can share this with other people very easily through a Teams thread, or where I can do things like, it looks like power went out here for a second. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. And where I can also do things like track, as a peer, I can assign and recommend learning to and track that. That's a big value proposition of Viva Learning. So again, most pilots for Viva Learning follow a very consistent pattern. The challenge with Viva Learning is that it needs to complement and transform a traditional learning pattern or system. Right? So you have to really believe in and understand that connected learning experiences is the goal, and we don't want to lose those benefits. Now, the good news there is it's really technically easy to do this, but most organizations need to adapt and grow their development plan. So if we look at employee growth and development plans, there are scenarios that aren't met by today's approach, and these are things that are additive, they're complementary, they're beneficial, that Viva Learning can do that maybe they can't do with whatever else you've invested in. And that's where I would start. So your pilot, yes, of course, if you have SAP success factors, let's connect it, right? That's part of the pilot. Use compliance-led training there. If you use LinkedIn Learning, let's totally connect that so it's easier to consume that information, right? There's so many things you can do in that pilot technically, but the core idea is find the patterns that we don't do at all today, and those are all pure play benefits, right, that you're getting through Viva Learning, and then use the rest of it. Like, was it easier to access that, traditional compliance or LMS training? Did you participate in more optional training? And you'll find that both those things tend to be better. And those are, again, great ways to measure the success of the Viva Learning one. So again, scenarios are the big winner here, where you think of the scenarios that you are uniquely positioned. Now, these are just 6 examples, uniquely positioned in your organization around Viva Learning that maybe, your traditional systems don't support, and embrace those as really the differentiators for this particular pilot motion. So that's Viva Learning. It is actually that easy. Now there's a little bit of technical issues and challenges without learning paths and things like that. But again, everything pretty much is being resolved through the roadmap. So just pay attention to when things are coming, and slowly but surely your organization, like everyone else, is going to keep using more and more of Viva Learning, because there's nothing else in the market that comes close to that connected experience, right? The value of it being integrated directly into Teams, into the flow of our conversations, so it's really easy to share learning objects. The fact that we can do peer-led learning, the fact we can bring our own learning through SharePoint. Wow, that's a huge one for a lot of pilot programs. Like, again, those are things that are really worth exploring. Again, some organizations might say, no, no bring your own learning. It must always go through this traditional LMS system. And that challenges them because, well, there's people who want to take learning, but it's not in that system, and it takes too long and it's too hard and there's too much friction for me to add it to that system. So again, it's a very healthy challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that the learning pilot for Viva Learning isn't going to be successful or challenged. It just means that the organization has to deal with this, right, and modernize their learning approach at some point, hopefully soon. There's probably nothing more strategically relevant right now from the mega trends that are happening within 2023 that we expect. All right. The next one is Viva Goals. Now, I am biased. I think fundamentally Viva Goals has had more impact on me and my work and the work that I do than anything else in the Microsoft product stack since probably Yammer years ago, right? Like whatever that is, 15 years ago or 14 years ago, whenever, before even Microsoft acquired it, I loved Yammer. So for me, this is a big deal. And so the thing with goals is that it can be targeted to teams and actually piloted very effectively. You do not have to do an entire org Viva Goals pilot. I would actually not encourage that. Start small, start with squads, if you use that term, start with teams, start with people that essentially work together on common goals, who have common objectives, who have common needs, and start to map goals with those people. We want to have them embrace it, make it a norm for them to use. And when we do that effectively, that's when goals really starts to shine, because goals isn't so much about the technical capability, which by the way is fantastic. It's an amazing product. It's that goals changes how we work. It fundamentally changes how a lot of people work today, and it changes it for the better. So the value proposition of goals is much more emphasis in the pilot around the coaching, the mentorship, the support, the expert transition to using OKRs generally and an OKR methodology, and to use it in a way that's more open, communicative, et cetera. That's the real thing that you're tackling. So a goals timeline is very varied. It's all of these are varied, but this one particularly we haven't seen as much consistency with. I will say generally I find 4 weeks is the minimum. We've never had success with the Viva Goals pilot less than 4 weeks, because you need real time, right? To like, you actually have to dig into it. It takes 2 to 3 weeks just to learn really goals, and so 1 week minimum just to kind of use it for a week is required for a pilot to even have good qualitative data. Now 6 weeks is what I would consider a more healthy short-term limit, because that gives you maybe a good 3 to 4 weeks of using goals, right, and learning and refining that experience to figure out if by the end of it, this team, this squad, this group is committed to continuing its usage. And that's the real goal with Viva Goals pilots. We want commitment, not just to Viva Goals, but OKRs and this methodology generally as a path forward for them. I thought I would give you, again, for reference, don't read it all now, in the slide deck that I've shared, an example of how we're thinking about this. So again, a pilot does not need to be a couple weeks. This one's over about 6 months, where we're doing multiple quarter planning of how we're using goals internally in our organization, with certain business units that have already been piloting it in November, early stage sort of exploration pilots. Now we're doing an official pilot program, and then that'll end in May, where hopefully we as an org have committed to this. Now that's possible because we're a smaller org, but I have seen very large organizations kind of make their way through a 6 or 1 year plan where they really do transform entirely towards goals by the end of that. So the challenge with goals isn't the technical, it's that the business transformation needs to be supported, right? And so that support requires training and coaching and things like that, right? Because you need to learn to adapt and use this OKR methodology for it to be successful. So again, technically, goals is super easy to understand and deploy. Literally, this is it. This is the slide. Everything that you need to know basically is in here. Again, it's uploaded. You can click on each link. It's basically all here, and a lot of it, as you see, is optional. Right now, I would say some of these are absolutely required, but generally speaking, a lot of these are optional. You can see IT support is only needed for a few of them, right? So that's the italicized. So this is sort of the technical work involved, and that's why a pilot of a week seems almost reasonable, because you could just technically implement it. A POC certainly would be easy to do. But actually, what you need to do is you need to work through a maturity of this team, this squad, this group, this division, this department, this business unit completely, right? This entire business. You need to go through that maturity curve with each of them, and it is different. Like one team can be much more mature in OKRs than another, etc. So that's the real challenge, is you're helping them mature that. And so things like doing champion writing. What's the role of a OKR champion or goals champion? How do you write better goals? That's a big emphasis. Yes, software matters, but actually a lot of it's about writing. It's about tracking. It's about connecting with other people. And so that's why you see two examples here where you have deep dives in coaching. You have simulations, for people, because again, you need a safe way to test and experiment with goals without potentially creating confusion about what we're measuring, what we're not, what we're, shared alignment around, et cetera. So this is the real root of an OKR or goals pilot. And this is also, I think, really emphasized well with the recommendations here that I have of some learning you can go take, which, by the way, works in Viva Learning. In Viva Learning, you can go take these courses, and these courses are all really good examples of what goals is about. It's about facilitating better conversation. It's about better feedback. It's about, asking questions, solving business problems, coaching. Like that's what makes a goals pilot successful, not understanding Viva Goals technically, although that's again relevant. It's you need it. It's necessary to be success, but it's not sufficient. Right? You need more. So that's the secret around Viva Goals for piloting. Let's talk about Viva Amplify. So you notice the first thing I'm starting with here is not Viva Amplify. I'm actually talking about a GitHub solution called Teams Company Communicator. And the real reason for this is Viva Amplify is not available in in preview until early in 2023, maybe I don't want to say early, actually, it's like mid to early year in calendar year. And then late calendar year is when it will be publicly available to everyone, right? So you can just start to use it. So what that means is there's this other workload called Viva Amplify that's coming. It's amazing, but that's actually later. The reason I wanted to talk about this particularly is because I think a lot of organizations aren't maximizing their communication channels within Microsoft 365. And the biggest one that I see not utilized well is Teams. And there's this wonderful solution Microsoft has in the GitHub repo. Now, of course, I've got some examples here of enhancements we've done with customers, like scheduling messages or a nicer browse dialog, et cetera. But fundamentally, right, this solution you can go and implement with a lowercase d developer for free easily, and you can start to use Teams for corporate communications. That's the benefit of Teams empowered company communications. And so doing a pilot program around that, which can be done in weeks, right, and have really tangible impact, has basically a lot of benefits. One of the benefits from this technique is that if you've ever used other forms of communication like email and stuff, you often find it gets buried. People don't see it, right? Teams, IMs especially, are very prominent. So again, with great power comes great responsibility, but for a lot of organizations, this is almost like a new way of reaching out, especially to individuals. I'm not talking about team channel messages. I'm saying like to individuals and saying like, hey, FYI, stakeholder X, right? This new procedure has been announced. It's coming out tomorrow or today. Here's the the link to it. Go read about it. I need your help surfacing this within your group. I need you to share this with your teams. I need you to talk about it. I need you to talk about the implications of it, and so on and so forth. Here's some other guidance on how to talk about it with your teams as well, right? So you can do multiple targeted IM style communications like this that actually have traceability, because then when that stakeholder clicks on it and reads it, let's say the first one reads the procedure, we can see that. Then we see that they clicked on the second one, how to communicate it with my employees. They read that. So now we have not just the page usage data and simple stuff like that, we have tangible data of exactly when and how they interfaced with this IM, this bot, that essentially surfaced that information to them. And that kind of intelligence, it really empowers greater and more effective communication over time. So what am I really saying here? I'm saying that there's this pathway you could do now in days or weeks where you deploy something called Teams Company Communicator Experience, and now people can start to use Teams for company communication, not just SharePoint and maybe email today. Now let's talk about the way that this kind of works. The challenge with this is that people don't use, for Amplify, the challenge with Amplify is people don't use Teams for communicating today. So Viva Amplify is a communications campaign tool. It's amazing for communication campaigns, but campaigns are only relevant when you're doing multi-channel distribution or multi-message distribution. And if you're only doing it in SharePoint News or something like that, fundamentally, Viva Amplify isn't going to do much, right? It might be a better way to edit and collaborate on news, but the real value of it is when you have, you understand the value of marketing, you understand the value of, creating a news posting for one user here, and then having, a Viva poll related to it, so it funnels people towards that. Different types of engagement and different places people consume information, we can design for those. In the same way that I would write a very different message in LinkedIn than I would write it in Twitter, or that I would write, in my white paper or something that we would do, right? The news article or the white paper, that's the big value piece of content. I do a bunch of other stuff around it to amplify it, right? To provide more meaningful routing for that, or creating more awareness, interest, and then slowly understanding and commitment, right? To, in this case, reading the document or reading the new procedure or whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's true. Now, Teams I've talked about a lot here, but actually Yammer and email are often really poorly used internally for organizations as well for company communications. And so I think that's also a great opportunity area. So Viva Amplify is absolutely a game changer. It changes the way we communicate, gives us new ways of working. It's wonderful. But if you're not using multi-channel communication today, you're not really amplifying anything. So this brings up, how can we start to play more with multi-channel communication now, so that later in 2023, when Amplify is available, then we're ready to pilot Amplify, which is a different process, which I can't talk about because the functions and features might change between now and then, between what we're doing in, what is it called, pre-preview or whatever it is right now, versus the public preview that'll go out next year, versus the broader release schedule. All right, here's another way to look at everything I just said. When you're communicating today, we don't just do a post message, right? What we do is we message things in newsletters. We message things to priority people. We create cute questions and answers that relate to that and then highlight it. Hopefully you're doing funnel systems like this. You're sharing that message in channels, sure, and teams, but you're also amplifying in a different way in some of those teams and channel discussions where it's a shared circle of trust so we can have discussions around it. You might target individuals like I mentioned earlier, right? Where I'm saying, hey, this is a thing I need you to action, I need you to understand, etc. Of course, everything arguably in topics is a form of communication, right? Because it's helping you with search experiences, it's helping you with finding content, it's helping you, with consuming content and information at a ready state. So again, that will eventually become part of your communication thresholds. And I would argue for sure goals, because literally they communicate to people, what we're trying to do, what projects we're doing, all those types of things. OKR is 1,000 times better to highlight to people than, PowerPoint, right? Because the OKR is something that's measurable, understandable, and everyone else, especially as goals takes up more and more intellectual time in your organization, becomes a sort of a norm in how people think. And also learning, right? Every time I create a learning, especially the bring your own learning, when I create learning content, right? Often I can take wonderful key news like procedures, and I can create learning that amplifies that learning, that procedure, where it helps you understand how to use it, in a frontline worker capacity, or how that procedure might help achieve better customer outcomes, or whatever it is that you're announcing or you're sharing. All right. So that makes sense. And what I'm essentially saying is, yes, all of this matters, but personally and professionally, our experience has been Teams is the most underutilized in terms of impact. An immediate impact, it's the most underutilized consistently. And so that's why Teams Company Communicator is what we're saying should be actually the pilot now, so you can have a pilot later for Viva Amplify. Right? You guys get that. Campaigns don't exist. The need to collaborate on campaigns doesn't exist without multi-channel distribution, or at least, thinking more broadly like this about communications than around a narrow band of intranets and email. All right. So that's Viva Amplify. Now, because I'm running out of time, and I knew I would be, I thought I would talk about Viva Insights and Pulse together, and I would frame it in a more simplistic way. But we have the power of Q&A today, so if you have your own questions about pilots, definitely ask them, because I would love to share those. And I actually got a few questions from others, so if you guys don't ask them, I'll make up some. Well, they're not made up, but they're like from some customers recently that I thought were really good, and I thought I'd share them with you guys. So I promise there'll be some information right after this as well. All right, so Viva Insights and Viva Pulse could also be piloted. Now, the interesting thing when you're piloting something like Viva Insights or Pulse or things like that is that we've been doing Viva Insights, workplace analytics projects, whatever you want to call it, just like Viva Topics. Before it was called Viva Topics, it was Project Cortex. We've been doing that work for years now. And I can tell you with confidence, Viva Insights is the most tricky, in my professional opinion, and most of our teams to pilot, because what customers want to do with insights can actually vary tremendously. And the second big challenge with insights, and I think this is the mistake I'm going to kind of highlight for today, one of them, is that people will often focus on the lowest hanging fruit, which looks good in insights, like improving meetings or improving focus time or things like that, right? So meetings is like a big focus, right? Management coaching, whatever you want to call it, and focus time. So they'll focus on those two kind of workloads because there's so many reports Microsoft has pre-built, like beautiful dashboards and reports and nudge tools and things like that built in. And I'm not saying that won't be successful. You absolutely can. We've done many of them. You can pilot and roll out Viva Insights that way. But here's a way to just look at it a little bit differently. If you want to make Viva Insights successful on its own, without business momentum, without bad employee engagement scores in a recent survey, without things that are triggering the full intention to solve this problem with a broader set of tools, you'll find that this can work on its own, which is this idea of improving employee connectivity with Microsoft 365 could be something that you could do just on its own, and there's no real equivalent capability anywhere else in most people's portfolio. So let me frame it a different way. When you want to change meeting behaviors, you actually have to work an uphill battle where you have to convince everyone in management and other people to believe in the data and then to move forward with that, which is a bit of a challenge. Believe it or not, when you talk about network density and how employees are networked, there's almost no headwinds because no one's really done this. That like they don't focus on it. There's no discipline in the organization where you have predispositions, expectations that there's, oh no, this is the right way, or maybe the data is wrong. Maybe it makes more sense to do it this way, right? Again, things that are a bit more problematic was management coaching as an example. Here, pretty much everyone understands if an employee is more networked internally in your organization, they're stickier. They stay in the organization longer. What's more, if an employee is more networked internally, they generally help more people and are more valuable to the internal groups and networks within the organization. Number three, again, almost universally accepted. If an employee has a large internal network and they're leveraging that to get their work done, they're more productive and effective at their work, generally speaking. So those three things alone, right, mean that this employee is more valuable. If they leave the organization, it's more impactful. It means that the organization employee has more impact, and it means the organizational employee is less likely to leave. Those alone, there's so many more benefits, but those alone are often enough to make this work, where you actually have data and reports and insights that you didn't have before. The other reason this works really well is today we have a problem. We came out of the pandemic, and yeah, we have the odd barbecue now, but we don't have a lot of these events and activities that allow us to connect with people outside our working groups, right? We don't have a lot of those things happening in companies, and it's a real risk. It's a very big risk because when you shift to remote work, mostly remote or hybrid work, or especially when it's almost exclusively remote work, you are working more transactionally, period. It's the nature of it, because you're competing as a company with family and friends and people they choose to have relationships with versus those that it's beneficial for them to have relationships with. Fundamentally, that's a big difference between the two. So what does this mean? It means I can guarantee every HR manager, leader, person within an executive capacity who understands what's going on around remote work is saying, we need to solve this problem. How do we connect and create this sense of connectivity that we used to use physical environments to do, right? Events, activities, et cetera, to do. How do we do that in a way that works for remote and virtual employees in a complementary way? I'm not saying don't do those physical activities, you should, but do that in a complementary way. And that's where the solutioning becomes critical. So one of the other mistakes people make with Viva Insights pilots is they often don't do something with the data. And a solution means we can try things. We can say, let's create an icebreaker app or create connections between employees through different motions. You can do very meaningful, easy, very low cost things that create more connectivity between employees, and then you can see that stark difference over, again, a 60-day period. By the way, while I'm saying the pilot duration is 4 weeks, that's the effort. Generally, all Insights pilots, you want to run at least 60 days because you want a lot of data, right? You want to be able to see the trend, see the changes you impacted, and what the long-term consequences, or at least the potential longer-term consequences are by having at least 60 days of data. So again, that's the gist of Viva Insights. I've written a bunch of that there for you guys for relevance as well. Now, the cool thing is Glint or Pulse, Viva Pulse, has a very similar pattern of approach. The problem with Viva Pulse and Glint is we need to have a driver and interest for it, and then we need to action that data, because no one wants to fill out a survey if it feels like it's not being actioned or it's not being authentic. So the challenge that Viva Insights and Pulse has is we need to take the insights and feedback, and we need to do something with that within a short amount of time to prove that this can be beneficial. Otherwise, you'll never sustain the commitment or investment, or at least you'll never get the good ROI out of a good pilot program. So Viva Insights and Viva Pulse both provide wonderful, they're complementary in really very real ways. Think of Pulse as kind of like a qualitative way of, it's a wonderful distributed qualitative way of getting insight, and then Insights being a more quantitative way. If you don't act on it, it's not valuable. And this is very true because if you look at the challenges we have today, right, data over dogma, right, we have people who believe that the teams are less productive in remote capacities and things like that, but we have employees that don't believe that. So we have leaders who believe people are less effective. We have employees that say, no, we're more effective and more productive. By the way, the data sides with employees here. And then you have people who are like, I want in-person work. I want more of that. I want less in-person work. And here's the funny thing. Almost exclusively, the number one reason everyone wants more in-person work is they want to feel more connected. They want to feel more connected to their fellow employees. So why wouldn't we focus on, right, employee connection? That's the right angle today, at least with Viva Connections. So do something, right, legitimately. If you're going to do any of these pilots with Pulse or Connections, you have to do something with that data. Of course, Pulse works at a leadership level. Manager, I'm doing stuff to improve. But again, that data in Pulse, if you don't know the surfaces all the way up, so that we can do things at an organizational level, that's the idea, right? Have a couple teams using Pulse, roll that up, and then we can actually really act on it and show that we're changing things for the better in the organization. Not by showing data, which is fine, you can do that, but by actually doing something about it. So again, a great example of this is these tools themselves are all about, obviously Viva Insights, I could take the entire session talking about all the different ways you can consume that information as an end user, but I think Pulse is a great example of this because a lot of the pulses are anonymous by design, so you can easily share that in a distributed way with the people that took it. You can say like, hey guys, this is what you told me, here's the changes over time, and now I'm going to actually be acting on it with these, these changes you've recommended, we're going to go action. Right, so that's the idea of Viva Pulse in a nutshell. So thank you everyone for your time today. I have our team worked really hard on this white paper that kind of breaks down the employee experience from like pre-join, pre-recruitment, to onboarding, to development, to growth, performance, right? All those things you do in the middle, to like exiting and alumni and post-departure. So we've thought about like how Viva and also just in general Microsoft tools work in that employee experience, and we provide a lot of guidance there. So I really would encourage you to take a look at that particular material. There's a raffle or drawing for those who are, I think, here. You'll be able to grab that. It's in the other sessions as well, so don't feel bad if you weren't able to grab the quick screen grab of that. And then lastly, if you have any opinions, feedback from me, I'd really like to hear it because I've been doing a lot of this work with customers, but I haven't spoken as much about it publicly about like pilots and things like that. So I'm sure there's things I could improve. So your feedback would be very invaluable for me personally as I continue to work on this content for future conferences and events. And reach out to me. I'm super friendly. I want to connect with you. I want to, what state are you in? And instead of showing you like these ideas of pilots, I could probably just show you literally customer patterns, obviously cleaned up ones that are anonymized or removing the customer references, but I can give you that, which I can't do in a session like this because it's, I would be sharing 200 resources and it just wouldn't work in the time that we have. So please reach out, be friendly and see if I can help you there. All right, so I'll check for questions. I was checking throughout. I didn't see any big ones coming up. So, and I know there's another speaker probably waiting excitedly here. So since I don't see any other questions, if you have some, definitely ask them. I'll continue to answer them quietly on the sidebar while the other speaker gets set up and starts to screen share. Thanks everyone. Thank you the community. Thank you the sponsors that supported events like M365 Philly. It's wonderful to have opportunities like this, and I hope this has helped someone today get some ideas and tactics that maybe they didn't have previously.
Thank you, Richard. And it was really, really a great, wonderful session. And I like the way you gave this presentation. Like, you covered almost all the topics. Like you covered Viva Connections, Viva Learning, topics, goals, insights, like Pulse, like Amplify. Like you haven't like skipped any of the topic. Like all
I
topics
skipped
are
engage. If anyone's paying careful
yeah.
attention,
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out a way to do Viva Engage in less than like 10 slides, so I ran out of time, which was apt because I definitely wouldn't have had time. So if you're looking for like quick advice for Viva Engage, I'll just say Storylines is a pretty magical thing, and it makes Viva Engage / Yammer a lot easier to understand and adopt in an organization. And then the leadership corner stuff, the biggest thing people make a mistake on is they don't see the value of Q&A. And now that questions and answers is becoming a content type within Teams, where Teams messages can be questions and answers, and you have that capability in Yammer, Q&A as a general value piece of IP or intellectual property in an organization is the single biggest thing to focus on. So when I generally recommend people do modern pilots for Viva Engage or Yammer or whatever, it should be about questions and answers, in my opinion. And whether that's storylines, whether that's AMA events, whether there's a bunch of motions around that, that's what tends to work really well in a short amount of time, sets a new standard, becomes a norm, which works really great for pilot to scale. And then, to be frank, that's the most valuable thing in Yammer today. If you were looking at it from like, I'm buying your company, the questions and answers is probably the most impactful thing. Yeah, serendipitous and employee connection matters, but I'm a numbers guy, and that's where a lot of the value is today. So I said I wouldn't do it, and I guess I could do it in a slide if I redid that, but before when I was figuring out the content, I couldn't figure out a way to do that without like a ton of pictures. Awesome.
That's good. I mean, really, I really enjoyed this session, and we definitely got a lot of information. And it's very good that you are super friendly, so we can, we can contact you anytime. We already have your information, and so pretty much we covered everything. And we also have our next presenter with us. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Yeah, have a great day.